Hey.
Gonna start echoing here in a sec. Right. Now do the normal. Go to mine.
All right. So, welcome to DZPD Builds week number 5. I
Week number
am
5. Who would have known? Who would have thought? 5 weeks in already.
5 weeks in already, right? I'm gamer tag Burt Reynolds, and this is my co-host, the one and only Negan Killjoy. As always,
What's
the
up?
golden voice of gaming. Another
Right.
week, another sweater. This one's a favorite of mine. It's thrift store vintage 1970s. I think it's a Sears. Love the sweater. Anyway, so tonight we're gonna, well, just a
Did you say
reminder of what we're
Sears
doing.
or Sears? Like you see it, or Sears, like Sears, the former company that used to be really big?
No, like Sears, like old. It's
Okay.
got an old Sears tag, 1970s Sears tag. I don't know.
Nice.
It's a zipper sweater. Zips up. Throw it on a
Okay, I
lot. I
see.
keep it in my office. It's a nice one for just casual gaming. Perfect casual gaming sweater.
Good throwback sweater. Nice.
Good throwback sweater. So, just a good reminder of what we're doing. So again, our kind of our goal here that we set out with is to put together builds. Nice positioning, Megan. I like that. Um, put together builds based on very basic, limited amount of time farming. So for the average gamer who cannot spend hours a day farming gear, we're putting together builds that are not 100% optimized, maybe not the perfect pieces, but they're very serviceable builds. Ones that you can put together pretty easily, playing a couple hours a day at the most, or maybe 5 to 10 hours a week, which is really in line with what we do. We I think somebody asked last night, how much do we game? Well, I would say between 4 and 5 nights a week for a couple hours, right? And that's really what we typically do. So um, tonight we're going to talk about Unbreakable builds, and that's the build we're going to feature. And in that, we're going to talk about raid builds because Horchata Beast, who joined us last week, he had asked us to talk about raid builds, and this Unbreakable build is, typically speaking, my raid build. So, without further ado, why don't we dive into it?
And you have successfully taken this through a raid, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
I
This has
have.
gone through a
Yes,
raid.
I have.
So there you
This
go.
has gone through the raid, so it is raid capable for sure. Um,
It's tried and true in raid reality.
it is raid capable. Yes. So guns. I'll start with guns tonight. You've probably actually I've already shown this gun. I rotate back and forth between this gun and another gun. On my Unbreakable build, I'm running Ranger. Because again, I really like the mid to long range engagement. This one has Ranger and Allegro, and I think it's called double duty, right? I don't know. Yeah, double duty. Um, double duty is just what was on it. I didn't really care. But Ranger and Allegro, again, this gives you good burst damage. Sometimes with this build, I run this Black Market AKM because it has better sustain damage. And if I want to split the difference between the two, then I run this gun, which is actually probably my favorite gun. It's a Mark 16. I like the Mark 16, especially with Allegro on it. Speeds it up a little bit. It'll put you close to a P416 that doesn't have Allegro on it. And you can see there it's only a dip of 137 RPM, but it has more damage. And both this Mark 16 and that P416 are 99% damage rolls. So very, very high damage rolls. And
So
so you can
just for a
kind
sec,
of get a good comparison. Yep. Yep.
when you talk about guns and weapons and damage. Obviously, you want high damage, but explain real fast the difference between sustained and the other kind of damage. What are you looking for when you say sustained, or I drew a blank on what the other one is?
Burst.
Burst damage.
Yeah. So burst damage would be a gun that's good at taking a single target down very quickly, hopefully in a magazine. Obviously, you and I were running the raid last night, and one magazine does not cut it.
No, not really.
On basically anything in the raid, or if you were doing tier 4 CPs, or we were doing heroic tidal basin a couple nights ago. Again, the enemies become very spongy, and so burst damage becomes less viable. But if you're doing challenging missions, right, burst damage is great. And if you're doing PvP, burst damage is great because you want to eliminate an enemy as fast as possible, get them off the playfield. But when I'm in the raid, for example, then I'm going to run either this or I'm going to run that Mark 16 because I can't take them out in a magazine anyway. So I want a gun that has more overall damage at a slower pace. I guess if I could get that kind of damage at the same speed or pace, that would be also equally good. But they don't, obviously the P416, the way it's balanced, it's faster, but with a little bit less damage. And then if you look at something like this is an F2000. This again is a very high damage roll. I don't think it's like a 94%, so it's not quite as high of a damage roll, but very high. Or this G36, which also has a very high damage roll for a G36. You'll see that they are fast, right? Their natural rate of fire is fast, but their damage is much lower. The CTAR, same thing, very, very fast, 900 RPM. But the way they balance that is they give it less damage per bullet. And that's going to give you, the faster the gun, the more burst potential. The slower the gun, the more sustained potential. And so if you're fighting really tanky enemies, I prefer sustained damage.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep. But I try and somewhat balance it out. So in this particular build, I'm running an LMG. I do not have any Petrov pieces, so it's not an LMG build. I could run an SMG, I could run a rifle. It doesn't really matter because I'm not the secondary gun. I'm not stacked for it from a damage perspective, at least at an armor level. But I am running this military M60E4. I usually run some variant of the M60. Almost always run an LMG if I have an option of running one. Again, very good at sustained damage. You can see low RPM, big magazine, a lot of damage output. This particular one, I have one with Allegro that has I think almost the exact same damage roll. Again, very high damage roll, but I'm running one with Optimized. And the reason I'm running that is Unhinged, which I run on all my LMGs, is receive 20% weapon damage at the cost of 25% weapon handling. And then Optimized is giving you back 15% of that weapon handling. So from a DPS standpoint, the Allegro would win out, damage per second. Obviously, the faster the gun, the more damage it puts out per second. But you get no DPS for every bullet that doesn't hit. So, Optimized is a nice choice for mitigating the handling loss.
And the last thing
that one makes sense?
Is lack of handling.
Yeah, and the M6 is the worst handling of all of them. Right? I mean, that thing is, man, when you start firing that thing, it's very hard to hold on to. On the opposite end of it, you can run the 249 Bravo is an excellent gun for handling. They handle really well. The tactical tends to have higher damage roll. Like it. Splitting the difference between the two. The Mark 46 kind of splits the difference between the two. This gun's in a bad spot. The infantry MG5. It's very fast firing. You can see extremely good burst damage, but it's belt fed, and takes forever to reload. Not in a good spot. So I don't usually run that. You also could run, there are several different LMGs that are magazine fed, this being one of them. Black Market RPK, again, this is like a 99% damage roll on this one. Very good damage roll, but you're basically just giving yourself a second assault rifle, in essence. There's also an L86. I do not have a good L86, so I don't have one because I have one any good. I've never gotten a good damage roll on one. So then in my sidearm slot, I'm going to actually run the Liberty. I could run any, and something with protected reload would also be a good choice here. But this I like the Independence. Well holstered, destroying weak points refills 20% of your current weapon's magazine. I, with my LMG, will target weak points in order to get ammo back. Especially not so much in the raid, but in heroic missions. A lot of times you can find a good weak point to hit and get some of your ammo back. And sometimes if you get on a roll, you will end up in a position where you don't have to reload for a very long time. So that's why I'm running. All right. Any questions on weapons, Negan?
Nope, you got the weapons down.
There.
Yeah, you got quite a few options.
Cool.
So you're running so you ended up with an assault rifle, LMG is what you ended up with. That's what you're running. And now you're going to get the armored pieces. So let's go with the overall strategy of when you're looking at building an Unbreakable build, what are you kind of building out? What are you looking for as far as the overall strategy? And then get into the pieces here in a sec.
Okay. Yeah, so from an overall strategy standpoint, you have to have 11 blues. A lot of blues. Not
lots of blues.
Shockingly, I mean, not that bad, right? Like you would think like that you'd have no damage, but that's actually not true. 11 blues is totally a possible thing. Although you'll see where in one case it limits something that I would love to be able to do but can't. But yeah, it's not that bad. The trick here is going to be some Gila pieces because of the amount of mod slots, the amount of rolls on them. So yeah, that's the thing you have to do. I have no skill power, 0. Not really needing any. Don't really want to waste a slot with it on this particular build. You're going to want high armor because Unbreakable gives you back 70% of your armor when your armor breaks. It does have an internal cooldown timer on it, so it's not like an always thing. I think the timer is like a minute and a half, maybe. But it's almost, if you think about, for anyone who played the Division 1, it's like a slightly gimped version of Nomad. And if you run a Revive Hive with it, which if I were going to the raid, I would swap out these healing Pokeballs for a Revive Hive. If you run a Revive Hive with it, you get 3 lives, in essence. Well, 2.5, 2 3/4 lives. So, again, kind of think about the Nomad from Div 1. Pieces.
There we go.
I am running
this is why everybody's here.
Yep, this is why everybody's here. I'm running a Providence Defense mask. 41% DTE, which I rolled. It's got health. It's got a very high armor roll for a mask. Might even be my highest in here, at least, in my loadouts. That's why I'm running it. Also, if I could find a way, and this is what I was saying earlier, the one thing that's gimping me here is the need for all the Gila. If I could get a few more blues somewhere else, I could get the third piece of Providence, which adds 5% weapon damage, like having an additional devastating roll. And I love Providence for that reason. Obviously, the 10% skill power is a total waste, but the 8% health is nice, and 5% weapon damage is great. As far as 3-piece sets go, I like Providence a lot. Y'all Gear, which comes out of DZ, has similar in terms of its stats, again, with the third piece giving you the 5% damage, which It's great if you're trying to push heavy weapon damage. That does not have a mod slot, so no mods there. Backpack, I've got a 511 because 511s can roll 2 static talents. So no active talents on this particular backpack. 511s sometimes, you can see here I have one with Vital. Sometimes they roll, 511s do roll with actives, but they're one of the only backpacks that can roll with 2 statics. It might be the only. Again, I've rolled the weapon damage on it. Armor, health, hardened, give me additional armor, and hard hitting gives me additional DTE. And it's got an offensive mod slot, which I love. Now, here's the problem with these 511s, right? The RNG that we talked about last week, you can sometimes get these 2 statics, but then they'll have a utility slot or defensive slot, and all of that's RNG. Now, I didn't need another blue here, so I want the extra weapon damage. The offensive mods are great. You can see on this one I have 4% assault rifle damage and 3% LMG damage. So this is an ideal backpack for this build. It might be the best backpack I've ever gotten, actually. So that's why I'm running that. And it has 2 blues. Great. The chest piece, which is of course the centerpiece of this guy, is going to be this Unbreakable chest. I have a couple of these, Negan. I have a couple from different brand sets. I could run a Fenris one as well, but it doesn't have as many blues, and so then I have to change pieces out. I lose some stuff that I don't want to lose, so this is my best option. This is actually a pretty good chest, right? So it's got 11% total armor. Maximum total armor roll I think you can get is 20, so it's not like super high. But if you think about 11% total armor, that's like getting hardened on this piece. It does have health, and I'll talk about that in a second. 2 defensive slots and then an offensive slot. Both of these defensive slots I have percent armor mods in. And again, weapon damage, 2% LMG, 5% assault rifle damage. That middle slot, so all of the Gila guards will always come with 2 defensive, but the offensive mod slot, that center slot, is RNG. So again, you can end up getting one of these chests and be like, oh, sweet, I got the chest I wanted, and then it has a utility mod slot. And I actually have one in my stash that has the utility mod slot, which of course you would not want.
So part of the discussion that you hear around Unbreakable, you had already said that you're shooting for armor and stuff like that. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer to find pieces that are percentage, or do you look for raw damage or raw armor, like an armor count, or does it depend what it adds to the build? Which of the 2 do you prefer to find?
So you're always going to get more out of the ones that have percent armor on them. So I could prove it by swapping one of these out for another mod. So I don't think I have any that don't have some level of percent armor on it. But you can see this one has just under 5,000 and 3.5% total armor. And if I swap out for one that has a high armor roll there, almost 6,500 and 2%. Let's look at what my armor was, 321. So we know that now. So if I trade that out, pick up this last piece, I'm going to drop down to 320.
Right. Okay.
So
yeah, that's always a discussion. People always ask that.
Yep. So you're always going to win out with like a good balance between the 2, right? So you want to have, you can see the ones I've kept. For a build like this, I've got a lot of these mods in, right? So that's why I keep so many. I wish I had more of those, like right around 5,000 with 3.5. I only have 2. I have one that's 4,200 and 3.5, but yeah. So that's the Unbreakable chest. And again, you're going to want one with the offensive mod slot and as many blues as you can stack up. I went for Providence Defense gloves. these are in other builds we've already featured, but 11% assault rifle damage, 5% LMG damage. I could go with a single stat one, or I could put in something like this one, which has assault rifle damage, but because there's health on it, and it's a decent health roll, yeah, it's going to push me up in armor and in health. However, the assault rifle damage could be significantly less because of that stat economy. I could put a glove in here that's a single stat assault rifle glove that would have, I have one that's in my stash that's got 14% assault rifle damage, but I'm actually equally using my LMG and my assault rifle, and so I'd rather get some extra utility out of that LMG. So that's the reasoning there for those gloves. Then I have my Fenris. Because I'm running an assault rifle, I want to push the assault rifle damage. Again, Fenris gives you 10%. I have Fenris. I have many options on this Fenris holster. I have one that's got more critical hit damage and higher armor. I've got one that's got a lot more critical hit chance and less health. And this one that has a ton of health and 6% crit hit chance where I rolled the health. The reason I'm running high health, and I mentioned that I'm happy to have some health on pieces, is in the raid, and when you're building for the raid, you need to stay alive. Like, that's your biggest problem. A lot of people think their biggest problem in the raid is going to be DPS. Your biggest problem in the raid is going to be staying alive. And so, again, the Unbreakable build, and we're featuring it this week, is because, from my perspective, there's no better first build to use for going into the raid than Unbreakable. We were in there last night doing some testing. I tried a couple other builds out. My 377 compensated build that I featured a few weeks ago that I continued to tune, I think it was performing pretty well, right, Negan? But then when we got to Boomer, I had to switch to this Unbreakable build because I needed to be able to kite Boomer around, and you can't do that with a 377 compensated build. So, this build is great for the raid. Your thoughts, Negan?
And it did work
Have
out.
you run?
No.
Yeah.
I've run it. Well, actually,
have you run
I
an
have an
Unbreakable?
Unbreakable. I'm building with you as you're talking about this. It doesn't have nearly the armor you have, but I have enjoyed it. I've run it a couple times for the same reason. It does. It gives you 2 lives, 1.5 lives. I do enjoy it.
1 and 3.
Actually,
1 and 3/4. Yeah.
yeah, 1 3/4 exactly. So no, I like them. They're good builds. And you're right about
So
wanting
you can
to stay alive in the raid.
Yeah.
No matter what anybody else tells you, that's what you want.
It's a good kite build for like Boomer. Again, you can stay alive for quite a while. Take a lot of hits. I think probably the only better build for kiting around Boomer would be a fully optimized clutch build, which RNG has never been in my favor there, and so I do not have a fully optimized clutch build. But I think if you had a 300 health clutch build and you were constantly critting on Boomer, you could probably do that. Final piece, we're going to run Gila knee pads. This is, again, I was saying earlier, if I could, this would be my ideal knee pad to have in here. Would be to have these Providence, because it would give me that 5% additional weapon damage. But you can see then I lose 2 blues. I have nowhere to make them up. And so can't run them. So instead I'm running the knee pads. And again, I've got some armor mods in here because I want to have that high armor. The higher that armor is, the more armor you get back, since you're getting 70% of your max armor is repaired when your armor is depleted, and then your armor kits used within the next 7 seconds are not consumed. And again, it has an internal countdown timer. Now, when I first put my build together, it did not. When this game first launched, this did not have it had an internal countdown timer. It was just very short, and so it was like you had a never-ending life. I mean, it literally never stopped. You could constantly get your armor back, which made you basically unkillable in PvP. So they put a much longer countdown timer between times that it can proc. But it's still great. It's still a great build, and it is one of my all-time favorites to run. Next, I will just say, again, that for raiding, when you think about raiding, having a combination of health and armor is a very, very, very good thing, because you're going to have to tank some stuff like poison gas and health. Poison gas armor. It doesn't impact your armor. It will kill your health down. So you do want to have in the raid some amount of sustainable health. And if you looked at any of my raid builds, they've all got at least 90,000 health. If you're not going to run health, then you need to run a ton of hazard protection, which would be, again, blue slots. And you can see I don't have another mask in here with hazard protection on it for running in the raid. But on some of my other builds, I would use like the Skila Guard, which has, hazard protection in place of that health. And the other thing I'm going to say is that if you tune in next week, we're going to take this exact same build and make a few piece changes to it, and I'll show you what a Bloodsucker build looks like, which again has that 11 armor requirement, but it plays very different. So Bloodsucker builds are very good in PvP, and Bloodsucker build is easily my favorite solo build for hard content. So not great in group, but if you're doing solo, tier 4 CPs, or you're doing solo heroic missions, I typically will put on a version of this build that uses Bloodsucker instead of Unbreakable. But I think we should test how this thing works. You're still reloading your gun over there, huh, Negan?
Yeah, so are you.
Your invisible gun?
So I am.
What?
Now, also I said you're doing the same thing on my screen, but going back to what you're talking about with the raid and staying alive and sustain and stuff like that, the Unbreakable also the advantage, like you talked about, with you lose your armor, but if you use a health kit within 7 seconds, it doesn't burn your health kit. You have limitations like that in raid, so you want to be able to, if you can keep your health kits and not lose them during the raid, it's also an advantage. So you want to stay alive, you have the extra burst, and when you lose your armor and you get it back up, you hit cover and you use your health kit. You get all your armor back and you go back into the fight. So it's much better to stay alive and survive and put bullets downrange during the raid. If you're not hurting something, then you're just hurting your team at that point. So this is something to keep in mind.
Yep. You do 0 DPS when your face isn't. Something we've been trying to convince Horchata to understand for 3 years.
We love Horchata. We love Horchata. Just give him a hard time.
We do. I'm just giving a hard time. So I forgot to show the stat sheet. So looking at the stat sheet, all weapon damage bonus, I'm at 35.5. Assault rifle damage bonus, I'm at 45. So quite a bit of damage output there, right? I mean, on my assault rifle, I'm running the 80.5 assault rifle damage, or total, combined weapon damage. My LMG damage bonus, 25. Again, not running, I don't have any Petrov in here. Damage to elites, 76%. Plenty of DTE in here. So again, I mean, it churns out some damage. It's not my highest damage output build. But again, I'm splitting that balance, right? Like it's about half-half. And I'm putting out some good sustained damage. And I'm able to stay alive. So, way to show this one, we won't do the whole thing, but it's a new week, so invaded missions are always a fun place to start. Do that on challenging. Run up there, Grand Washington Hotel, and challenging. Well, right, Nathan?
All right. So the same question that I always ask you is: so your strategy for running Unbreakable, is it face tanking? Is it short range? What's your strategy in running this?
Oh, I play this just like I always play. I hang back. I'm not really, I don't need to use the unbreakable part of the build in order to feel like it's effective. It's there for those oh crap moments when you're not paying attention. Maybe you kind of blew it and you weren't paying attention. Um, I think the biggest thing is in the raid. You can end up in situations where you're getting focused. You're suddenly being a lot of enemies at once, and you'll suddenly take on a ton of damage out of nowhere. It'll feel like out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere. I mean, you feel like it's coming out of nowhere. Everything decides to shoot you all at once, and if you're not running it, you don't really have a warning, right? So I treat it very much just like a safety blanket. Is kind of what I'm treating it like. It's like the oh crap, I blew it. Um, should have been paying more attention. I see the thing pop. It makes a little sound. I realize it's happened. I pop my med kit. Try and take advantage of that free med kit, and then I play it safer. Is basically what I do. But yeah, I don't really treat it any different than I would any other build.
So even though you do get that extra life, technically, you don't face tank as much as some people do.
No, I mean you can use it. You can you can do it strategically. Sorry, that line. We're gonna do this room by room. Always cracks me up because they still don't have intel after
Right. After how long?
3 months
After
of this game.
this long. They should have some intel somewhere. Damn it.
By now you'd think there'd be some intel. Yeah. So I think you can strategically use it. If you've got an enemy that's hiding in cover, you've got your safety net, right? So like you could use it to push strategically. I think in PvP it can be used much more strategically. Although I have found that in the dark zone with it, um, just the chaos and noise of fighting in there, especially if you're kind of in a scenario where you're maybe taking a landmark and then suddenly engage in some PvP. I don't see it go off as easily in that chaos, and I don't hear it. And so I don't always know it's happened, that it's procced. And then, one, I missed the opportunity to use the medkit, and two, sometimes I end up counting on it when it's not actually there, so you have to be kind of careful with it. And we very potentially, I mean, we'll just run the first part of this mission, but we very potentially may not even get to see it proc unless I do it on purpose, but that's okay, right? I mean, I think that's another point.
Right, you're using a safety net more than anything else, so that's kind of nice. I mean, like you said, you could use it to push a little bit if necessary, if things get tight. And
Yeah,
you wanted to push on the boss
speaking,
a little bit, like
absolutely.
Buck over here.
Yeah, if I wanted to, here, I'll just go, I'll do it. Now I'm blinded, can't see. But yeah, I'll go push him. Like, he won't like it. He'll run away. This guy runs like a coward. Now, see, this is a prime example, right? It just popped because I pushed really good and hard, and I got stuck in I got hit by one of those shock things that the snipers put down, the shock puck, and I immediately got focused.
Yep.
But you can see there, I was able to push him, and now I'm on cooldown. That was good, Negan, because that shows exactly what we wanted to show. I am on cooldown, and yeah, I think it worked about perfect.
There you go. That's what you want. So it's good.
And you can see that little gray box is going down very slowly, and when that is done, then then it's done cooling down. So that's some good play test time, and I think we're probably out of time for this week, and I don't want to get in the habit of going over.
Not too far.
Right.
But just do the recap again of, so you start with the Unbreakable chest. That's what you have to even build an Unbreakable. But from there, you
Talk
gotta
to me in
look
the
at the
bathroom,
armor.
not out in the machine gun fire. Conference in the men's room.
Yeah. Okay. Conference in the men's room. Weird place to have it. So, and then you're looking. So obviously, you're looking for the Unbreakable chest. That's the first thing. And then you're putting pieces
that's a
together that have
non-negotiable.
blues. Yeah, non-negotiable.
Yep.
Then you're putting pieces together that have all blues because you need 11 blues. And
Right.
your perspective is the more armor, the better is as far as you're concerned because of the 70% perk that comes back.
Correct. Yep. You want that 70. I mean, you want to get the most out of that 70%. So at one point when I was putting the build together, right, and I didn't quite have it dialed in, I was running, I think, about 280,000 armor. And that's still good. You know, I had it more favoring health than armor. The nice thing about these pieces, the Gila pieces, is I can do that, right? I mean, I can swap all these mods out for 10,000 health mods, and I'd have 160,000 health and about 285,000 armor. Although when I had 285,000 armor, it was just because I had different pieces in here. I was stacking different pieces for different reasons. But I would definitely favor armor. You want the most out of that 70%. Having tested it in many different configurations, high health is not necessarily your friend because you don't really have a way to replenish it. Much easier to replenish that armor. The one thing I will say, Negan, is, and this I guess would be the other thing, is depending on how much DTE you have, like I have 76%, right? That's the raid is probably more than I need. I kept a piece of pads here with patience in here, so like in the raid, should I decide I want to do so, I can actually change out to these pads. They don't have a percent armor roll on them. I kind of wish they did, but they don't. Because these are actually TU1. There's a problem with you can't roll new pieces into really old pieces for some reason, and these are really old. I've had these since like since I first hit 500, right after I hit 500. So I can't roll percent armor onto them because I don't have any old enough pieces with percent armor. But you throw patience on. Being able to duck into cover to heal your armor is helpful. Just say that. If I could run patience and hard hitting, I would. But the Fenris knee pads only have one blue and no mod slot, so I can't run that either.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Cool.
So like some good strategies shared there.
Yeah. So next week we will definitely cover a bloodsucker build based off of this build, and we'll probably be on at a different time next week. I'm probably thinking it'll be like either Tuesday or Wednesday, or maybe it'll be Friday. Who knows? Maybe it'll be Friday. Anyway, we'll be on a different night next week, but we'll be covering bloodsucker builds, and yeah, with that, thank you for stopping by, and as Negan would say, see ya.
Thanks for stopping by and see ya.